You see a lot of train traffic racing and rumbling through Jacksonville. The city's a rail focal point. But how did it all begin? Emily Liska heads the Jacksonville Historical Society. She says the railroad got real traction here at the dawn of the Civil War, around 1860.
Jacksonville at the time was just a town of 2,000 people. It was a rough and tumble place. We needed to be connected to the rest of the world, and railroads were the ticket to that. And the first run from Jacksonville to Lake City took place in March of 1860.
Things began to pick up steam by the late 1800s. You could finally catch a train between Jacksonville and New York.
After that time, the heyday of railroading in the area was certainly once we had our grand 1919 terminal, today our convention center.
And this, believe me, was the temple of railroading.
Railroad historian Robert Mann.
I'll tell you, the terminal itself was dazzling, and at one point was the busiest station in the entire world.
This is one of the waiting areas at what was then the Jacksonville Terminal. Just think of it, 20,000 people and 142 trains a day passed through this complex when it opened back in 1919. These are the ticket windows. Can you imagine standing at one of these ticket windows, buying a ticket, and then going out and climbing on board one of those beautiful trains?
50 years ago, Bob Mann hung out at the terminal, loved every minute.
What's your favorite, I guess, remnant of the past in here?
My favorite remnant of the past and my own pretty extensive collection are the timetables, because they really kind of tell the story year by year, month by month. The ghosts are still here. I can still hear the echo. I can still hear the announcements. I can still see all the people crowded here.
But times change. The last train pulled out in 1974. The terminal shut down. Only a public outcry saved it and lit a fire for historic preservation. Bob Mann says times are about to change again.
We'll have commuter trains, Amtrak, and high-speed rail. 3 different high-speed rail consortiums will end their lines here in Jacksonville.
That's good news for the Skyway Express. The People Mover was born 21 years ago when the first segment opened near the convention center. It's designed to shuttle commuters and others downtown. It's drawn criticism, but like the old terminal, new life may be just ahead.
I'll say within 10 years we'll be boarding trains here again.
What about buses? Where did they come from? Ed Mueller, who led the JTA for nearly a decade in the 70s, says we can thank a railroad tycoon.
Transit in Jacksonville really started with Henry Plant in the 1880s when he had mule or horse-drawn trolleys in the streets of Jacksonville.
Then the city got electricity and used that to power the trolleys.
Trolleys, also known as streetcars, were huge on the Jacksonville scene. Of course, there were still the horses and the carts and the horses and the buggies, so you can imagine it was a very busy downtown scene.
But things were about to change. Trolleys and streetcars were doomed. They were being pushed completely out of the picture and replaced by buses.
And the last streetcar ran in '36. As the buses pulled out onto the streets, the transition had been going on.
What killed the trolleys? They could only go where the tracks took them. Buses could go anywhere. And cars were making a big splash back then. Fast forward now to the mid-1950s. The Florida legislature created the Jacksonville Expressway Authority to build highways and bridges, but privately operated bus companies were going broke.
We just could not support it with private systems. So the national government stepped in and said, we will help.
To get that help, Jacksonville got into the bus business.
When it became apparent that transit was to be a municipal function, it was combined with the Expressway Authority and called the Transportation Authority.
It was 1971. It wasn't easy to run a bus system then. It isn't now.
It is very difficult to run a successful and good bus company. The one in Jacksonville is quite good, but it's difficult.
A lot of people ride the buses in Jacksonville. It's a ride to work for more than half of them. They depend on these machines. But what if the buses stopped running? What then?
You can imagine the uproar if we said there are no buses, you people just have to get along as you can. They can't get to work, they can't get to the hospital, they can't get to the doctor, you know, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be very difficult, very difficult.
JTA says ridership is up, and its buses will make more than 10 million trips for the 5th straight year. Looking back, we've seen a lot of changes in the way we get around. It makes you wonder what's coming.
I think we're eventually going to go to a rapid transit system, have some high-speed bus lanes on highways, perhaps, which is done in other areas, or rail going out suburban areas. It should help the downtown area greatly.
Jacksonville is fortunate to have the St. Johns River, but in the early 1900s, crossing it without a bridge was tough.
Even when automobile traffic became popular, you ferried those cars across at what we know today as Main Street.
Emily Liska says it wasn't until 1921 that Jacksonville got its first bridge, the Acosta.
It was another 20 years before we got our next bridge.
That was the Alsop, or Main Street Bridge.
And by this time, automobile traffic was pretty well packing the streets of Jacksonville. It was 1941.
In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, 4 other bridges went up, followed by plans for a Dames Point Bridge when Blunt Island became an industrial economic hotspot.
And so it became a goal of the business community to provide adequate transportation to that area, which they were sure would develop. Then 14 years later it was dedicated.
Bill Birchfield was a JTA leader when building the bridge and a people mover got green lights. Bill Birchfield was also at the helm when J. Turner Butler Boulevard was built. Now, you love it or you hate it, depending on the time of day you're driving it. But either way, it is a big deal, and it did bring big change.
J. Turner Butler probably is the most significant generator for more development than a lot of people like in the southeastern part of the county.
That means heavier traffic. Birchfield says if recent improvements don't help, a return to the past might.
I think the best thing that could happen to JTB is to put tolls on it.
The toll booths that were on Butler came down in '88, but money's tight. They could go up elsewhere. So what does it all come down to, the future of our transportation system, that is? Those we talked with said it depends on what Jacksonville does with its future.
And I think the real question becomes for Jacksonville, Florida. What is going to be the developed heart of our city? You always have to hope it's the downtown. You hope for that.
I'm Terry Casey for Making Moves.